it's not about having the right answer, but it's around iterating it, trying to solve it as you're in. It's kind of, you're fixing an airplane while it's flying. You're not fixing the engines per se, but the inside of it. And so that's our view of Agile. And, we thought, let's bring some similar mind people together, some kindred spirits, I like to call it, just to really brainstorm and come up with answers. We had of all the sessions we've had some really good interactions, some really great insights. We'd like to continue that with this in this session. So we've also have this Agile HR consortium. It's a loose confederation. It's not a membership per se, but it's really a gathering of like-minded people. The reason we mentioned Jason's book is Jason's a big fan and supporter of ours, very helpful, and so we view him as part of our family, our ecosystem. So any way we can support him, we want to, because again, Agile and HR is a relatively new phenomenon, and we need, I guess, we're the early adopters in this room, and we need to kind of promote it, encourage it, and inculcate it through the rest of the profession. So, Steve, any opening comments from you?
No, I just great to see everybody again. Thank you so much for your support, and we look forward to Jay and Maren's presentation today. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay. I met, I guess Jay is one of those random LinkedIn requests that he gets. Fortunately, he selected mine, and I just really said, I'm in the Agile HR. I think I'd read something those guys were involved with that, and let's connect. And that's what I do. I just put that out there, and people respond. We get as part of that. And Jay was kind enough to speak to our students. I'm twisting his arm for next year, also in April, as maybe a case study with the team and Maren. And students really loved him. He was great. And I say it's not your father's Walmart anymore. It's a lot different than people expected. I grew up a little bit older than most. I remember Walmart is a different way that it is now. It's very innovative. They're using digital workplaces much better. It's just, been a tremendous, just watching their growth. And I've seen a lot of talent move to Bentonville, Arkansas. Now, your first reaction is, well, that's not really the garden spot, but I think it's changing a lot. And I think getting, people who I admire to move there, I think that says a lot about the kind of organization they're building, the kind of people, and their focus on, helping their associates go to college and benefits and things like that. Again, this is $1 million company, and they're really leading the world in transformation. So I'm very appreciative of their support of our students and our colloquium here. Jay and Maren, you want to just kind of introduce yourself real quickly to the rest of the group here, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure, Wayne. Happy to kind of jump in here, and then I'll hand it over to Jay. But it's good to meet you all, and Maren Wagner, and the pleasure of leading workforce strategy and being actually HR for HR at Walmart. I've been with Walmart for 4.5 years. And yes, Wayne, I did move to Bentonville, actually from California. I was in Newport Beach,
wow.
right by with my toes in the sand when Walmart called, but the opportunity was too great to pass up. A little bit about me. I'm actually from Germany originally. I was born in a city called Karlsruhe and actually did my undergraduate in psychology up north in Kiel, Germany, and then moved to the States to get my master's in industrial organizational psychology and then my PhD in organizational behavior, which was out in California. Did some consulting work and then worked at DirecTV, which then became AT&T. Interestingly, now it's back at DirecTV, its own standalone again. As well as Ticketmaster. So was really in the tech and entertainment space before coming to retail, the largest retailer with Walmart. So it's been a really amazing 4.5 years. It kind of, it's like, wow, we've done so much, but also the blink of an eye. Because to your point, Wayne, things are moving fast and we're innovating. We're definitely a business and transformation from a business perspective, but also from an HR perspective. And that's what's exciting to me. I'm really passionate about the space of HR and how that's evolved from personnel and administrative to really being a strategic thought partner and change leader, as well as transforming itself as a function. So that's a little bit about me, and just excited to be with you all today.
Cool, thank you.
Awesome. And Wayne, thanks so much for that. And Stephen, I appreciate both of you guys allowing us to participate. Maren is an amazing colleague. We are partners in crime and peers as she workforce and strategy, as well as people for people. My role is really people operations. So how do we put the glue together and deliver it for our associates every day in the right ways that meets them where they are, is where we try to focus. I've had the privilege of being with Walmart for a little over 32 years now. So yes, please tell everyone that we did have child labor 32 years ago, and I am kidding. But I have had the opportunity to work in every segment across the business that Walmart operates today, as well as in every market, and had a chance of 5 expat assignments across the world. And what I really have loved about coming to HR, and I joined HR, Maren, about 6 years ago now. What I've loved about it is the fact that we are really, as Maren talked about, a business in transformation, but our associates are in transformation, just like society is, or our employees. And what we're trying to do is meet them where they are and treat them just the way everyone treats consumers, because if you're not relevant to the consumer, they're not going to keep shopping at you. So what we're trying to do is really meet our associates where they want to be met. And our evolution is candidly more about them, I think, than us and our business. We are here to serve the associates so that our associates can serve the customers and that we can gain market share and beat things like Amazon. Thank you, Wayne and Stephen. And I'm going to buy the book, even though it's on Amazon, but get it on Walmart.com. We'll help you do that. And I'm just happy to talk with Wayne and Stephen. My education and background is on the tech side. So I'm CIS, Computer Information Systems, again, 30 years ago. So it's all changed 15 times since that point. But I'm more the tech and operational side, and Maren is the HR and workforce and strategy side. So it's great to be with you guys, and thanks for the time.
No, I appreciate that. Again, if you could, in the chat room, we're asking this question: how can Agile help create a change or any mindset in the HR teams? And again, for those that just joined, this is a brainstorming session, a colloquium. We're going to talk about some key issues. We're going to expect your participation, your input. The thing about Agile is it's kind of iterative. We don't have all the answers, but through iterating and discussions, things evolve and things emerge that really be helpful to us all. So, Jay and Maren, just maybe how is Walmart approaching Agile for HR? Maybe just give a high-level view of that.
Yeah, sure thing. And Stephen, I will say, in true Agile fashion, this probably won't be a presentation, much more of a discussion. So we actually purposefully don't have any kind of PowerPoint slides and things like that, but wanted to keep this really interactive and discussion based. So really don't have a ton of presentation materials, but are completely committed to sharing our journey and having a great discussion about that with questions. So thank you for the question, Wayne. I would say, again, 4.5 years with Walmart here, a couple of things I would say is a few years ago, we started to early on, I would say, kind of pilot and test and learn what is Agile for HR. At the time, we're a little bit more decentralized from an HR operating model perspective. That has since changed, but about 5 years ago, we were fairly decentralized still, such that when you think about our business model from an enterprise business perspective, we have certain P&L segments. Right? We've got Walmart US, which is really all of our stores, if you think about it that way, including the e-commerce space of how the US customer shops, essentially. So whether that's on, online or in a store. And then we've got the Sam's Club business, which is all things club and membership. And we've got the international business, which is kind of non-US footprint. Those are really our 3 P&L business areas. And then HR is embedded, or was embedded at the time, in each of those rather than being completely centralized. And so we took an approach in Walmart US to kind of pilot test that, and so kind of took the HR function within Walmart US and really honestly changed the complete operating model. It used to be much more traditional, right? If you think about it, of certain folks who worked on HR programs and then others who were HR business partners. But there wasn't a good clarity of role, and honestly, productivity probably wasn't at the pace where it needed to be from an HR perspective. And so we really kind of flipped the script there about 4 years ago. And what were kind of program teams, we really actually call them product teams, different type of talent that we looked for, had a much closer partnership with technology, and also started to take much more of a UI UX approach when it came to the associate. So we call our employees associate. So we think about like customer research and journey mapping, right? How do we apply that same lens to our associates, our own employee base? And so as you think about a customer shopping journey, we started to go down the path of like, what is the associate journey from how do you find me as an employer, or how do I find Walmart, to the hiring experience, to the onboarding experience, the development and career progression experience, all the way to what we called Wish Me Well, which could be retirement or, I left to find another job. And so journey mapping that experience, and then having product teams that solve problem statements against pain points in that journey, just like we would for a customer. That was really kind of the first, I would say, incubation of getting to Agile at HR about 4 years ago. Fast forward to where we're at now, I would say, and again, this is a journey, right? So it's like never across the finish line. But where we're at now in the journey is we've really actually taken a much more global view of the HR function now. And so rather than being decentralized across the different P&L segments, we really have one global people team. We've also rebranded HR to people and have been very deliberate about that, including in job titles, job descriptions, and so on. And so now in our global people operating model, we do still have our people partners, so right, our HR business partners who support the business, and then our other teams being the specialist teams, or centers of excellences, and then how they work today in terms of Agile methodology is where we have quick sprints. So we do have sprint reviews and some of those ceremonies from an Agile methodology perspective. We also approach kind of how we're thinking about our tiger teams. So when we have big, hairy, meaty problems to solve, getting the right people in place, including our tech partners, by the way, too, because a lot of it is digital enablement. And Jay's team plays a big part of that because he sits right at the cornerstone between our people business and our tech partners and product teams. So we get a tiger team together cross-functionally to solve those problems. And really it's about hyper prioritization. So example is, all things like vaccine work, COVID safety protocols. We got a tiger team together around that cross-functionally with the clear mission of, hey, in 3 weeks, deliver this product. And that was their hyper focus. And so, to every 2-day stand-ups, progress report outs, and also empowering them to do the work. So that gives you an indication of some of the work in flight today and how we're practicing Agile methodology in real time, as well as how we've evolved over the last 4 years from our initial kind of test and learn. So Jay, maybe you want to add a little bit more to that, but that gives a little bit of where we're in the journey and where we're at now.
Yeah, and Maren, you said that extraordinarily well. I'll say the only addition I can even add at all would be we also are turning on and really turning up the dial as it relates to what are the personas and how do we appropriately categorize the associate experiences so that we can prioritize what's important to them. Again, much so like we do with customers. We just have a tendency inside of the HR space to be much more focused on, I'll call it delivering the processes versus really putting the employee or the associate in the center to try to solve the problems for them or their pain points. The other thing, Maren, I think that's really evolved us and where we're definitely still on the journey is trying to take all the data we have and stop just looking at it from the data perspective or the lens of the information, because Walmart is huge. I know every company has data on associates. It's legally a requirement. So we have probably more data in the HR organization than many other companies do. And I think all of us could say that about our employees because we need to have it. We know it because they work for us and we support them. But we're really trying to imagine the way our HR partners and our specialists look at data and more so focus on the insights that can solve the problems of today and ultimately start thinking about what are the problems tomorrow. And that's kind of the coolest new work we're in front of now. We're starting to look at attrition, and you guys all know as the world's coming back with COVID, hopefully at least going at bay somewhat, it's trying to focus on where are the real attrition barriers for us, where are we seeing major opportunities. And Maren, exactly as you described on the COVID model, how do we reduce time to hire in those critical priority areas, but more importantly, when I reduce time to hire, how do I then apply that to the whole organization and lift the whole company? So we take the one persona and learn from it, then apply it across and cascade it to all personas so that we lift for the overall experience for everyone. It is a journey, and Wayne, Stephen, I'll add one comment, you guys. One of you said about the plane's in the air and you're changing the plane. you're updating the plane as you're flying. Be clear, there are 4 engines, and I'm telling you, we are changing engines at the same time. But that's the magic of this, because with Agile, you could change one engine and the other 3 keep flying. And that's where you get the power of the ability to move with speed and change for your associates, for your employees, for whomever you focus on. You can really make a difference, and you can do it with speed.
In terms of getting employees ready to do this, right? It's one thing that you guys are leading, but how do you bring the rest of the HR team along? What been some of your successes, challenges, in terms of that?
So do you want to take a step out, or otherwise I'll go on some of the challenges is what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to make the shift, but we hear it a lot from a lot of CHROs and people in this call. It's one thing to have this plan about we need to be more agile, more creative, but it's another thing to get a practitioner who works for us with us to do that, to be able to, unlearn, relearn, do, upskill, things like that. And so I'm just wondering if you had any kind of examples of what worked, what hasn't, and I'm sure it's a work in progress, but I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of alluded to it a little bit on the talent side. I think actually 4 years ago, early on, we're probably in a better spot today just because the industry has shifted a little bit, and into great programs like yourselves. Agile of HR is more even of a topic, but when we started the journey 4 years ago, it was even hard to find talent that kind of knew how to spell Agile in an HR way, right? And so also, it breaks some of the paradigms from traditional schooling, which is why programs like yours are so great in this of, traditional HR and again, Agile from a mindset perspective, product mindset, UI, UX, persona work, as Jay mentioned, and journey mapping. Like those are not really topics you see in an HR curriculum. And so there is quite a bit of upskilling. We did partner with a vendor as well to provide and invest in training into our associates early on. We're finding that's not as much of a need now, which is actually great, shows a little bit of maturity in the journey. Part of it is because our teams in the HR world are working so closely with the product and tech teams, right, on the tech side. And so it becomes a more natural way of working. And, as you kind of sit with your colleagues, natural upskilling as well. And then I think the other thing is making sure the teams, right, those tiger teams who are working on those big problems have the right mixture of skill sets. You don't need everybody to be, fully product mindset. If you have a few peppered in there, because in some cases you also need strong functional HR expertise and have them be a part of your team. So, an example would be, as we simplify the new hire process as an example, that was an Agile team working on that last year with COVID hiring. We needed to ramp up hiring in our stores and facilities and clubs dramatically, given, everybody was trying to buy toilet paper and we needed stockers and we needed people to fulfill those orders. And our hiring process was too cumbersome, including the tech enablement with that. And so the Tiger team put together with that included a mix of, product folks in technology, product-minded HR professionals who kind of knew the methodology and could really think about, associate pain points in the process. But it also included, employment legal counsel, as well as, folks who are functional expert IO psychologists in assessment protocols, right? And making sure that the assessments we use to hire our folks are validated, as an example. And so we think about that cross-functional mix of a team, which actually is one of the Agile principles as well, and to the chat earlier on inclusivity and different perspectives. So I think that's an important call out and lesson learned as well. It does not have to be one size fits all, and everybody needs to be an expert in product mindset and Agile methodology, but instead you need a few of those and then the right mix around them, and then they're really clear on their role and how they contribute to the team.
Yeah, Maren, I'll add, I think, if you go where we've seen, I'll call the word flops or step backs and test and learns, and you learn from some of the bad is Maren, you hit it at the very end, I think. Roles and responsibilities as you stand up these Tiger teams, that's where we've seen a lot of, I'll call it false positives and even false negatives. So you think you're going to make traction, and then all of a sudden you lose it because the teams are competing, or I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Our other challenges we've seen, so role and responsibility would be a big one. The second one is our tech partners' readiness, because the other thing I think we underestimate in the HR space is our tech partners are so waterfall driven. So I got to build it. You tell me what you want. You give me every requirement. I go build it and you get it. Because most of our platforms are mainframe. We're not as cloud oriented, especially on our legacy space. And, Walmart's 60 years old, so we have a lot of older technology. So historically, we've not had just to kind of push our HR teams, Maren, between the specialists and the partners, but also push our tech teams, because our tech teams really want to go cook it in a little room and then deliver it all. And then, of course, it took them 12 weeks. And in 12 weeks, we've already changed what we really needed to solve, because the customer changed, the associate changed, the output changed. So we've seen a lot of learnings through that. And then the other thing, and Maren, you hit on it, is when we don't empower that small team or that product group, they tend to flop again, or they don't actually meet the outcomes of the expectations. And that's on Maren and I. And in different groups, like as Maren talked about, Walmart US was kind of our spearhead for this, and they really did a good job of inculcating it culturally into the HR space. And then we've allowed that culture to kind of spread, which makes a huge difference, because we got it kind of seeded, but it's still been some, pluses and minuses. And where I would challenge everyone is, as Maren talked about, the more you can get a few strong players who can make a difference, and you let them lead one of those agile teams you put on something, you then start seeing others grab it and go try to repeat it and replicate it. And then you can coach them to deliver it better. But that's kind of been our learning, or at least from my side, Maren, watching it. And be clear, make no mistake, at least in my head, getting the tech partners ready for this level of change and need to move with such speed was much more difficult than I anticipated, I'll tell you right now. And because they just wanted to build it and we will come, versus being at the table with us every day, versus changing on a dime and moving. And HR actually was more ready, I think, Wayne and Stephen, than some of our tech partners were. Again, it's a lot the legacy journey we've been in the HR space, specifically in applications. A lot of the new stuff out there is cloud. A lot of the new stuff requires it. But when you're working on new and legacy or existing platforms, it becomes a bit tough.
So Maren and Jay, I love our comment. I love our comment from our friend at the Netherlands here about let's let go of siloed thinking, right? In a lot of work we deal with a lot of leadership blind spots when it comes to agile and culture. And some of the biggest components of that has to do with that siloed thinking. When you got leaders or department heads or silo leads, that have pretty high egos, and they kind of measure their success based on their control. Not every organization is established where HR has as much of a strategic role as Walmart probably does. But what is your guys' experience been over the years in regards to addressing that level of control measurement and the blind spots of leadership egos that really put up roadblocks for this evolution to become more of an agile culture and that mindset shift?
Yeah, it's a good question. I probably have a little bit of a, unique perspective too, just because I've been an HR business partner too in multiple companies. And, what I've seen, because that question comes up a lot of like, well, how do you kind of get HR a seat at the table, right, from that perspective and help? Honestly, that's not the business's problem, really. I mean, yes, there's going to be some leaders who are, may have never seen good HR, but that happens at Walmart too. We have leaders today who have never seen good HR either. In the past, I think it's actually on HR to show up differently. And that's both through how we upskill and develop, the expectations we set, the jobs we set, and how we work, as well as making sure we have the right talent in there, because naturally talent, in a certain role gravitates to their strengths. And so if you put somebody in there who's administrative in nature and only thinks about order taker, that's what they're going to do. And that's just going to be a reinforcing cycle with the business. But if you put somebody in there who's going to be root cause and push back and use data to say, hey, Jason, I hear you that you want to, hire 100 people right away, but what are you really solving for? What's your attrition? I see that you're losing, X amount of employees in this one location. What are we doing about that? Right. So it's like, it's a different dialogue, but I do think that's actually, that onus is on the HR function. I sometimes hear like HR being passive in that of like, oh, the leaders don't invite me in. It's like, well, it's actually like the whole purpose of HR is not a P&L function, is to provide value add to the business and show that value. And if I translate that to the Agile methodology, a little bit in my mind is actually that's HR like back office working better to deliver more business value. The business actually shouldn't care how we organize ourselves and if we're Agile or not, like whatever, the customer doesn't care, right? They just care they get a good product and a good app that they can shop for their online groceries at, and that's a seamless experience. Similarly, right, if we're truly Agile and employee focused in that and providing value to the business and solving true problem statements and pain points, the business really shouldn't care how we organize ourselves to solve those problems. They just want those pain points solved. And so if we can do that faster and quicker and more effectively because of how we're organized ourselves and how we work with an Agile mindset, like they will see that win. Hopefully that makes sense. It might be a little bit of a different spin, but I have kind of a, I don't know, I have a robust perspective on that, I guess you could say.
Great.
Interesting. I know that most companies have a challenge thinking about, beyond the next couple of weeks or months at the most. So as you think about, the way value is administered nowadays versus in the future, what do you think is going to change, and how can Agile help organizations get there? What is potential impact on the practitioners? What will change around that? Have you guys thought about that, going forward?
I think some of it is, I'll kind of start off here, and Jay would love your perspective because your tie to tech partners, I think, really rings true. I think what will change, I think the talent journey is part of it, right? So who we hire, who we place in what roles, how we put those teams together. I think that's already been changing, but I think that's an ongoing journey. And that's fantastic, again, to have programs like this where early on in early careers, you start to build some of that acumen. I saw a great question in the chat from Alan on, do we have Agile built into our competencies? In some cases, we actually do. So we just rolled out 3 competencies for all HR, and it's around business acumen, because again, it's like you got to know your customer, right, which is the business, in order to solve it. Data and digital thinking, which also, right, if you think about Agile methodology. And then the last one being associate experience, in the sense of like UI, UX, and true experience, not just, be nice. And so double click into those definitions. So it actually is kind of sprinkled in. We didn't call it Agile necessarily, but if you think about the principles and methodology, it's actually woven into all 3 of them. The other thing I think that will change is there's a lot of HR technology coming just externally that's available. And so fit for purpose, how we weave that into our processes, what makes the most sense for whatever organization and what you're trying to solve for. It's like there's a big menu now. And so how do you put the right things on your menu and then localize it in a way that leads to a personalized experience? I think expectations of employees are rising. We see that with labor market trends and people reassess, right? The great reassessment. And so if you don't have a good associate experience in the company that you're working in, whichever company that is, right? It's unemployment's pretty low. There's a pretty good chance you're going to get a call from somewhere else and you're going to go somewhere else. And so I think those expectations from an employee perspective is something that has already shifted and I think will continue to shift. So those are some like initial thoughts that we're wrestling with. But Jay, anything you would add?
Maren, I think you said some really huge, great nuggets and gems. The only other thing that comes to mind is really, I think you're going to see the evolution of HR or people as we tend to call them, becoming technologists. As you kind of mentioned in the beginning, HR is going to, I think, evolve more and more towards needing to leverage the human side with technology enablement. And this is where I think we all struggle and we get reluctant. And as we started this call, Stephen and Wayne and I were talking about, where you use AI and where you don't, and what is applicable with AI, and do you get bias and different challenges? And the answer is yes. Just like with every human, an artificial intelligence will go with whatever it's built with, whatever it's fed, and it will output the same thing your brain would if that's all you're fed. So where I think HR is going to evolve more and more is how do we train and how do we integrate our humans with AI to make sure that we're getting the right insight from the AI. Because so many times we just let the tech folks build it, but we don't sit with them. And Maren, like you just talked about, we don't say, well, here's the human side of this, and here's the human equation, or how the employee is going to recognize this, and how do we make it fit for purpose to enable them to deliver whatever the task is at hand, or solve whatever the problem is, versus just letting the AI build it on its own. So I think we're going to become more and more technologists with huge data dependencies, if that makes sense.
Cool.
Yeah, I totally agree, Jay. It did actually prompt one other thought. It's less about HR itself and how we work, but HR is an enabler to the broader culture. I was at a Agile Institute with Bain a couple of years ago, and particularly finance and HR as functions, right, set the tone from certain like infrastructural components that help allow for the culture. So let me give you an example. Like one on the finance side is, right, the annual like operating plan, which tends to be pretty waterfall in most organizations, right? Like once a year you sit down and you plan your budget. Well, that's not really Agile, right? Like you don't know like when the next pandemic is going to come along, or the next big problem statement, and how you shift resources. And so from a budgeting perspective, what's the role finance can play in the broader culture if we're also saying Agile mindset more broadly as a company culture versus just in our own functional house. On the HR side, I would say I mentioned, Tiger teams, and we're doing that today by just saying, hey, Jay, Maren, come on over and join this team. Our job descriptions may say something different though, right? Our hierarchies and organizational structures are still different. It might not say anything of how we're actually working in terms of a Tiger team or an Agile team putting together. And so I think that, and we have not started that yet, Wayne, to your question of like what's coming, but thinking about like our job architecture, our organizational hierarchies, they're still obviously, we're Fortune 1, we'll obviously have some kind of hierarchy, but how do we account for different flexible use of resources, work arrangements, to actually acknowledge, right, how teams might actually be doing the work that today is happening, but actually agnostic of the organizational charts they sit in. And so that's a lever that HR can use as well to help reinforce a more broader Agile mindset.
Great. I think Ariel had a question, and if you, again, chime in, or if you want to raise your hand, we're going to make this interactive, not just a few of us talking. Ariel.
Yeah, I'm real. Hi, Maren and Jay. I'm new to this, but I am a 30-year HR business partner, only in major big companies. So I don't know anything about the small ones. I just know about the big ones. And I guess the question is, again, I'm a newbie to Agile. I'd love to know more. How did you originally convince leadership that this was, and you said, listen, it's none of their business how we work as long as we deliver. And I totally agree. But how did you in the end convince leadership that this was the way to go, and kind of show them those little successes to get them to buy in?
Yeah, Ariel, it's a good question. I would say it's really HR leadership, right? Because a little bit to Jason's question, the business really shouldn't care as much like how we're organized as a support function in the back office, right? They just want value delivered in the best way. From an HR leadership perspective, I think, honestly, we had quite a bit of a case 4 years ago where it's like, well, it's not working great today, so we're just going to try something new because it has to be better. I mean, full honesty, there was some of that just in our own HR work where it's like, we're spending months and months or years on certain programs until they finally rolled out, and then they still didn't meet the need, right? We've kind of all heard that saga. And so there was this like, hey, we need to just kind of reassess, and based on where we're at today, we just need to get better. And if this is a way to do that more drastically, then let's try it. I think the other thing I would add is testing and learning and showing quick wins. So as you then flip to a model to kind of fuel the support from leadership is like, what's the one or two little things that we can show value right away that it is working, whether it's a quick product launch or team engagement or certain progress on something. But I think that's really important too, is like once you've kind of got that initial buy-in or like, free path to start exploring, is find some quick wins along the way as well. Don't wait too long on that.
Yeah, Heather, you said it. I think the way it actually kind of mushroomed in our world, Ariel, in that it started coming to life, and then we almost, Maren, couldn't contain it, which is then when we got it in front of leadership and said, hey, this is working. We've got to get it out there because it's making a difference, and we can be more for the business with this. Then the business leaders jumped on. So it's making the business pull is the kind of model that I think Maren and I have both tried to strive towards versus try to be the push people, because that's, if you ask me, that continues to be one of the things I don't want to be in HR. I don't want to be the pusher. Like, I don't want to push performance management. I don't want to push talent. I don't want to push attrition issues. I want the business to call on us to help them with the problems they need solved in their business. And so again, I would say, and I think Heather said it on this text, I would just test and learn inside your own house, make it work. And once you get it working and established, the businesses will see it and they'll pull for it versus you trying to push.
Because I think they don't understand sometimes what you're trying to vocalize, do they? So actually only by going to them and say, we did it in this way, that's sometimes how the message gets across.
Right.
It was interesting when your CEO hired your new CHRO a couple of years ago. She came, Donna Marr, she came from Adobe, I think, right? So it was a software Silicon Valley company, which is interesting. You typically want to hire someone from the same industry, same background. So I think that says a lot of what the senior leadership wanted from HR, right? Is that they wanted, and again, maybe the previous person was more innovative, but it seems like that was a kind of a clue in terms of what his expectations were.
Yeah, Wayne, I would agree. Going back to talent, right, in the seat there, and I think two things just to highlight maybe on that, because I do think it's important. One is Donna actually had HR and customer experience at Adobe for a while. And so we think about that customer experience lens, UX kind of design thinking, right? In addition to the industry she was in, she actually led that function as well, which infuses into the work and it makes her very savvy in that we can leverage and is a huge enabler for us at Walmart. The other thing, just because I can't help myself to your comment on the tech side and engineering, is why we're doing this too is because the business is transforming. So we used to just be retail and our competitors being the Krogers and the Targets, but now we're in financial services and healthcare and B2B services that we're selling more broadly, as well as have a huge population of tech and engineers, which, by the way, we can sell our own software as well. And so that's a different ballgame. And so who we benchmark with and the type of talent we need then, like, that's flipped as well, which is even more so the impetus for why HR needs to change itself so they can also propel to change the business, because we have to, right, based on our business strategy.
Interesting. Go ahead, Steve, go ahead.
You the way you've described things here, it's both mobilizing the head and the heart around this movement to there. So I wonder, what was the purpose of a compelling vision, and who held that vision, and who's been accountable to that vision in mobilizing this work?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Dave, I would agree with this too, but in terms of the mindset shift to be more agile, speed, and innovation, it actually starts at the top from a business perspective with Doug McMillan, our CEO. He is very, out in front and brings that thinking into the transformation of pure play retailer, even in an omni way, right? Includes e-commerce, but to expand to other areas, to focus on how we work and what we're calling ways of working, being much more driven through speed and innovation, really is a tone at the top. And he sets that really A, example, and B, expectation for the organization in various ways. We have a monthly, officer meeting where we get together and review the business. And there's a lot of talk about how we continue to transform how we work, the mindset we need to shift, speed, agility, innovation, collaboration as key principles within that. And so that tone at the top is really there from an overall company perspective. So it's not just kind of HR in a corner working this way, because it is better, more effective, but actually the infrastructure and culture more holistically. And then each business area kind of takes that to themselves, including, of course, HR. Jay, I don't know if you'd add anything to that or if you'd agree.
I totally agree. Well said. And for me, I feel like what's happened over the last 5 years, Maren, since Doug took over as the CEO, and I know many of you have seen this, is we've moved much more towards an entrepreneurial spirit. And how do we focus on solving the business problems with the levels of speed that our customers expect? I think we had gotten a little, I'll call it a little big, and had lost some of the focus on that moving with speed and keeping up with our customers. And as we've transformed with Doug into a much more omni company with as Maren mentioned, healthcare and financial services, as well as all the online businesses across the globe. It's that has been the, I'll call it catalyst, and Doug, the primary leader, Maren, without a shadow. And it's he who has cascaded and been the champion that we can all aspire to.
Cool. Susan, you had a question?
Really interested in kind of understanding the sequencing of how kind of what I would say more that the HR technology integration occurred. So wondering if it was HR that went to technology to challenge the I would say corporate services function that were supporting the HR systems, or was it technology coming to HR? And then, how many people from HR actually are embedded in what I would call product teams that are really focused on enhancing your product, like your HR systems?
This one I get to go, Maren, so it's exciting. Susan, you're right in my world. And this will be probably surprising, but maybe not, you can tell. It was HR who challenged tech. From a business perspective, about 8-9 years ago, about a year and a half before I came to the function, we as HR, the current CHRO, her name was Susan Chambers, she looked at our stack and our ability to move and how the HR team was functioning. And she said, wow, we've got to be able to move with more speed. We've got to put the associate in the center, and we've got to become much more associate centric. As she talked to our technology partners, they weren't ready. They didn't even have a solution, as you can imagine. And I like the fact you're grinning, Susan. We had in our world at that point, and please don't quote this and don't go outside our this call, but we had over 300 applications to serve our associates 8-9 years ago. Again, 60-year-old company, we built on versus rationalizing anything. So HR called to order. That's when I joined the HR function, was back then. And they said, okay, tech, we need you to be more than you've been. We need to prioritize for you versus pulling you apart, because that's the other big learning, I'll tell you, Susan. And Maren, you were part of this. We were pulling our technology teams into multiple different directions because of that federated model with Walmart US and Sam's, and each team wanting their own specific function just because we're special or we're something different, when performance management is performance management. It's performance management, right? I mean, in the HR practice, we all know it, but we were, interestingly enough, our number one caveat to drive it, or catalyst, but number two, our own holdback group because of the siloed function. So that's why it's taken us, I'll call, really 8 years to get it, I'll call it embedded, Maren. And we're starting to see huge traction the last 24 months. COVID was another catalyst that helped us, whether we loved it or we don't love it. It actually really helped everyone call to order because we had to react to the situation, and it made a real difference. But we've cut our tech stack down now by about 45%. So we're down from 300 applications to just at 200. We'll hopefully be to substantially less than that in the next 18 months as well, because that's the other thing I think in the HR space we tend to forget. There's all these spider webs in the back end that keep all of our things together and connected. And while we may want to go fast, we also have to be logical and not let things break behind, because if the clock stops ticking and I can't calculate someone's hours, it's a legal and compliance risk. So we have to be very cautious and careful to make sure that we don't impact pay specifically. But we're also highly focused on experience, as Maren, we both are trying to hopefully emphasize enough. But even more importantly, value back to the business. So we want to solve the problems that make the most difference. And then we want to, in our capacity, clean up all that back end debt we have, because we just call it legacy tech debt that we've got to clean up. And we made the decision about 6 years ago to transform to a Workday application. So to shift all of our core into one stack. And that was, I would call it, the next caveat that helped lift it and allowed tech to purely focus, if that makes sense. Susan, hopefully I answered your question, but it's exciting because this has been definitely a journey that we're still on, and we're standing up a complete product group now that'll have about, Maren, keep me honest, I think it's about 28 people will have products. We'll have each domain will have a product lead. Think compensation, benefits, talent, skills, talent marketplace, all of the different areas. And that product team will actually sit in our tech group, because they're going to really have accountability for the strategy of the technology stack, for the roadmaps and how are we going to get there, and for understanding and interpreting the business needs into how does that play to a technology solution for the future and not just for the now. On the HR side, we have a group called End to End that's about 16 people that kind of face off to those guys. That's on my team. And then in each of the businesses, Walmart US, Sam's, technology, we have stakeholders that are direct responsibilities for those business players, because I have to solve the problems of Sam's that may be a little unique or a little adapted from the problems of Walmart. So we try to solve everything in kind of three ways. We go common, adaptive, and specific. If it's specific, I'll let the segment run it. If it's adaptive or common, Maren and my team will run it together with technology delivering it. And hopefully, again, I answered your question.
You did. Thank you.
Cool. You know, one of the challenges in creating a change-ready mindset is creating a safe place, safe space for people to be able to experiment. And one of the epiphanies we get as teaching is we see that in our students, you know, and we see it in our clients. They're kind of freed up to really bring their best selves to work. They're engaged. They're being creative, and you know, it's very rewarding as teachers, consultants to do that. But you know, it's kind of rare in organizations because you know, it's I don't know if you call it. It's, you know, people just kind of, they've tried, they've given up, and they just kind of go through the motions and are not really questioning things. One of the books we're reading, called Sooner, Safer, Happier, talks about the Challenger disaster and the Boeing disaster, where people aren't free to really verbalize. If they have an issue, they're afraid to bring it up because they'll get shot down. So we have to make the production numbers. We have to make X amount of widgets by this date. And we don't really care about other things, and we sweep issues under the ground. And so the key is establishing that safe environment where people are willing to kind of challenge and bring things. I guess maybe so leadership, but how have you guys kind of inculcated that into HR? Obviously, maybe it's a work still in progress, but I'm just curious, you know, we view that as a fundamental requirement to anything going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say definitely, you know, in progress and journey, but I think a couple of things, and just from an HR perspective, what gets recognized and talked about and rewarded and how, right, is really important. And so when we use town halls to talk about iterations or how teams are, you know, working in an agile way, and delivery not being perfect, but progress, right, over perfection and learning, that's been really key. So I would say two things that we've been doing. One is truly that, on being mindful of what we reward, recognize in a public way as well as in a private way. We think about, you know, budget dollars that we have to recognize individual associates who've contributed in certain ways. And so just that reward and recognition pillar, I think, is really important, both publicly and privately. Secondly, I would say is just the upskilling and learning. And so we've got a lot of resources in the HR space now on like LinkedIn Learning, and talk about, you know, Agile articles. Wayne, I know I sent you the Wagner resource as well. Yeah. And so it's those types of components, including enabling our managers to be aware of that too, because those are the people leaders directly, right, that need to allow for the freedom and the autonomy and enablement, and then to let their teams run. And so that's the other piece. I would say reward and recognition and kind of upskilling, learning materials in that mindset that we're leveraging to create space for it.
Steve, did you have any observations, comments?
No, it's interesting you brought up the book Sooner, Faster, Happier. We're considering that as our next textbook to our course that we teach in the spring. And one of the ways that the question that we're often asked, which is why we set on this quest to find this text, was, so what's the appropriate place to bring agile work into play? And the book points out, uses a David Snowden tool called a Cynefin framework, which is Cynefin is Celtic for habitat. And in that habitat, David Snowden draws out 4 specific domains of activity. One is the simple area, which is pretty typical, where we have known information and it's a straightforward thing. And that's probably not a good domain for Agile, because we already have well-established patterns of way of doing things, and bringing the work to realization. The second domain he calls the complicated, where we have some of the information, maybe some aspects of Agile are useful there, but primarily, we have a lot of information, or we can easily find it. And so the area that he prescribes the most appropriate use for Agile is in what he calls the third domain, which is the complex area. So organizations are by nature complex adaptive systems, and there's got all of this careening going around with thinking styles and the idea that people have to find a way or learn their way through the complicated or the complex environment that they're working in. And he describes that as the most prevalent and the most appropriate domain to bring Agile work in. So if your organization is faced with significantly complex, new, innovative, transformative arrangements around the work, then perhaps Agile is the answer to help you get through that. Because if you try to solve the complex environments with traditional methods of leading and project management, you tend not to get to the heart of the issue very well. The fourth domain that he identifies is the chaotic, and nobody wants to go there, but maybe we've been in there during the pandemic. And again, he says there's some very good applications of Agile thinking brought into that environment too. So I recommend that as a thinking tool. We're going to be introducing that in our next iteration of the class that Wayne and I teach together at Penn, to bring the Cynefin network, the framework to our students' recognition, so that they have an understanding of where to start thinking about where to apply Agile concepts and ideas.
Again, this is a great conversation. If you have any additional questions, comments, please bring them up. Let me see here. So you mentioned the Gardner model, I think, Maren. That was kind of interesting. It talked about maturity. Have you guys been using that as a guide, or tell, what kind of scholarship have you been using to kind of, help you in the journey? Yeah, obviously you've dealt with Bain, and we had a book called Doing Agile Right by, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank here. Darryl Rigby, phenomenal guy, spoke last year at our class. What's been your kind of guide to kind of do all this so far?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned two of the key ones. I mean, right from an HR perspective, we're definitely leveraging Gardner for HR strategy, ways of working, and transformation and progress, maturity. So that's definitely one. And we have actually monthly or bi-monthly strategy meetings amongst our people leadership team. We bring in, various perspectives. It's not always one. It's not like, we have the Bain model and that's all we do. So I would say we've been less about one model that we're just like holding on to, but more instead gathering different perspectives. So that could be from Deloitte as well, working with Art Mazer. He's had some great thought leadership for us. We're partnering with Thurston on some things. As mentioned, we've had Bain and Gardner as well. So it's bringing in the different perspectives and converging them and discussing them and more embedding it into our practices. I think, Stephen, what you just said really resonates. We spend a lot of time in the business talking about kind of run the business and change the business. And it's the change the business side that really lends itself well to Agile, not just in the HR space, but actually how the business team operates as well. Right? Because again, the Agile methodology isn't just for HR, we're seeing it across the business as well. And then we're applying it also in HR, particularly where we have new technologies or new problems to solve, where Jay's team gets involved as the common, as he mentioned, right? The bigger, meatier, hairy problems that we have to work across. 24-hour hiring is another example of that, where it was a big, quick thing we had to do last year in response to the pandemic. And so that really resonates versus where we're just operating and running the business. The only other thing I would say, maybe Wayne, to your question on models we've used, also just staying close to our competitors, what they're doing. So just other companies and benchmarking. So not necessarily just academia, but what are other companies doing? And one kind of way of working we've adopted that we're calling kind of a 4-in-a-box model. So, and Jay's team works in that. So we think about who solves those meaty problems. How do we set up a tiger team, making sure we have the right representation? The 4-in-a-box really consists of one person from the business, and the business could be HR if it's an HR problem to solve, or it could be, various other areas of the business, depending on what we're trying to solve for. They set out the business strategy and identify the problem statement based on the pain point. Then we have our product partners, the other is the P in the box. Then we have tech, really the engineers, software, hardware potentially too in some cases, and then UI, UX. So those are kind of the 4-in-a-box players. And maybe just one thing I would say is where we're starting get to maturity-wise culturally is that any of those big kind of change the business or complex problems that we're trying to solve, we leverage those types of teams. That's where we deploy them. And that's also how we get our funding. So when we think about our budgeting process, it's, hey, if there's only one person kind of asking for it, but we haven't aligned it as a 4-in-a-box team, then, you know, it's too early to ask for funding. And so I just kind of share that as an example of practically how we're infusing it in the culture and just where we're at on the maturity model.
Interesting. I know there's one, again, please, if you have any questions, some great comments I've been reading, just kind of raise your hand or talk up. I know there's a few people on the call who are, you know, want to be advocates of Agile in the organization, but they've been frustrated. They haven't been able to get people to kind of buy into that. Any magic wands you guys have used to crystal ball that you've used that can really help them? Would be one thing that really has been most impactful in terms of getting people to kind of at least listen and be receptive to Agile thinking? If anybody has, and not just Maren and Jay, if anybody has any insights around that.
I have
Ariel,
a
go ahead.
question about that.
Okay.
So I'm so new to this. You know, I guess the big question is, and I'm in the middle of job search. I'm only looking in big companies, and I know that, you know, there are so many companies that are not using Agile yet. You know, if I walked into a company and, you know, wanted to propose Agile, and, you know, what skills and background, education, like what do I need to do to really get upskilled, so that I can, over time, you know, once I get the lay of the land, kind of start to introduce Agile, even in a small way, you know, even in those small wins.
All right, I would say you're kind of doing it by being on this course as well and in this dialogue. So I think kudos to you for being here and in this type of dialogue. I think, you know, as kind of mentioned, there's so many frameworks, but all kind of with a common core and spine kind of in the back to it in terms of Agile methodology. So I think it's really getting familiar with that. And so some of the basic principles are there. I think the one thing, maybe just in what you said, and Wayne, might be a little bit to your question too, is Agile for what? Like, why are we doing it? It can't just kind of come in like, hey, I think this is a great idea, let's do it. It's like, well, why? What are we solving for? That actually in itself is an Agile principle, right? Of like root cause problem solving and unpacking a problem statement. And so I think that's really important. And Wayne, to your magic wand question, there probably isn't one, but I would say it's like, we've got to be really clear on why we're using it. So if there is a complex problem to solve and it has not been solved before, and that might be a window of opportunity to introduce Agile, right? To kind of say, hey, we've got this thing, we've got to figure out 24-hour hiring. I'm just going to use this example here, metaphor. And we don't know how we're going to shorten the time from, you know, weeks long of hiring to get that time to 24 hours with great tools and technologies for a great candidate experience. Like, that's our problem statement, and we have no idea how to do it. That's a great way to say, you know what, like, let's try something new here. Let's apply Agile methodologies and get a team organized to solve that problem, and then let them run with it. And so you're kind of infusing that thinking then in an actual business problem. And if that works, then you create momentum. Because really what you'll likely find then is two things. One, the people working on that problem statement are going to find it more fun because they're empowered and autonomous, and right, it's kind of like a new way of working. So there's a freshness about it. And secondarily, the actual outcomes you're achieving actually meets the business need. Like, you are able to solve that problem probably quicker and more effectively. And then you've actually created momentum. So maybe that's probably my big advice is like, what I wouldn't do is just come with a big book of Agile and say like, hey, I think we need to do this. I would be much more prescriptive about it, like what situations and why and where's their momentum to solve something, and then use it as a lever to solve that problem. And then you're going to start to get critical mass and you know, change leadership as well to you know, get momentum, because as mentioned, people will enjoy working that way. And so that creates a little bit of a cultural momentum, and the business will support it because you solved one of their big problems in a more effective way.
Yeah.
You know, Maren, Steve mentioned this earlier, and it sounds so simple, but it could be one of the most difficult thing leaders deal with today in selling Agile and selling the ideas and selling culture evolution, all of those things. You really have to tap into both the mind and the hearts of individuals. And I think in any type of change evolution, culture evolution, implementation of Agile methodologies, you really got to tap into people's emotional intelligence and tap into that function of their being, so they're open and acceptive, right? So you cannot forget the emotional standpoint, the hearts of people, and don't just come from a standpoint of the mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, one of our clients actually, to that point, Jason, we asked a question one time, said, so what was the impetus behind you getting your reps in terms of turning people's heads on this in your organization? He says, I learned to fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And I thought that was a really good piece of wisdom. Like, fall in love with the problem first. So be clear and articulate, understand the dynamics of the problem, and before you even think about a solution. So often in our businesses, because we're short-term thinking, we want to bring a solution to a problem that we really don't fully understand yet. But he said, learn to fall in love with the problem, and then that will lead you to the best answers once you've got a better understanding of it. So having that patience and fortitude to stick it out and really dig into what the issue is, and then thinking, okay, so how do we get out of this now? Using Agile methodology might be a quick accelerator.
Heather, do you have a question?
Yeah, it was just following on from Ariel's question. So is it my understanding for Walmart that you lift and shift people almost project by project if there's a need, rather than the whole of HR is sort of sitting in a proper squads and tribes type approach? And is that how you sort of started it, I guess, by pulling people off their day job to work on a specific challenge, rather than, because that's quite a different concept, is where I'm feeling is, yes, you can come and work on a project with me, rather than your whole day job is now to be flexible in a squad environment.
Yeah, Dave, we can probably tag team this one. It's a little bit of both. So we do have, based on problem statements, where we might say, hey, Heather, you've got these skills, would love to be part of this project team that's kind of, you're deployed against it for a bit of time, but it's not really your day job as much, right, or your job description. But because of your skill set, I'm going to pull you over to this project. So that does happen. Meanwhile, though, we also do have a more robust ongoing team, which is really Jay's team that functions in that. So Jay, I'll let you speak to that. But his team is kind of the spine within that, and that is their job. But then we, support that through other teams where needed as well.
Yeah, and Maren, you said it well. If you think about it, the common, the adaptive, and that specific CAS model that we talk about, if it's adaptive, if it's common, I have someone assigned to it, right? Because it's going to perpetually go across all segments. So that's where you'll see that established roles and constant functions. But if it's one of those adaptive things like COVID, we couldn't predict, it was changing at the moment. We brought in the best players and put them on what we term a tiger team. And we made this tiger team that goes out and solves that problem, and we hold them in that problem. And even in the team, Maren can attest to this, we'll bring in and out players based on where you are in the problem you're solving. But it can go from dedicated to part-time, but those are really the big, meaty, and some of the real exciting stuff is coming to life for us. And we're seeing the real overnight lifts and the change happen, Maren. But it's also, Heather, about empowering those 8 people. And what's happening, or what I'm seeing, is those that come in and then go back to their other day jobs, or go in they stay in their day job and they're supporting us. It's like igniting this fire of the change is coming to life. So I don't think we purposefully did it this way, Heather. I think it just came out this way. And it's really helping inculcate the culture across, and it's exciting the broader HR community, I think, Maren, which is where everyone's starting in. And again, I'll give all of this start to the Walmart US side, because Maren, this kind of, again, was insulated and kind of grown with Drew and the Walmart US field team, as Maren talked about 4.5 years ago. And it's just now gone across the enterprise in a much more effective way.
Lorraine, you had a question?
Yeah, so, Maren and Jay, maybe this is not an issue because you're such a huge organization, but what I'm wondering about is what I find is that the people that get asked to be on teams are the same ones, right? They're these skilled people in a small company, and so they get asked over and over again. And then it's like, oh my gosh, what else can they take on? And so, some of the agile projects get delayed just because there's such a limited amount of resources with that skill set.
Huh. We definitely have that problem. I'll be honest. We've not solved that or cracked that nut. I think that you're agreeing as well. That is even the size of our size. I mean, part of it is we are conducting talent reviews just at lower levels as well to start to get visibility into our talent. Kind of the good and the bad news of being so big is like, yes, we have a lot of talent, but like, how do you get leadership visibility to manager, senior manager talent that, it's got throughout the organization that then we can deploy. So there's a lot there, which, and Jay mentioned a little bit, a talent marketplace as well. So we're doing a lot of work on skill identification and how we can actually more systematically and at scale identify the skills that our associates have to pull them into projects like that based on those skills, as well as their own interests. But I'll be honest, that infrastructure has not really been built yet. We're still ideating on that. We know it's a need, but we have not fully cracked that nut yet. And then the other thing we're doing is just trying to get to know our talent. So we review talent on a quarterly, if not monthly basis, just to talk about, who, what skills, strengths, who's high potential, right, and how we leverage them for some of these projects as well. So it's not always like rinse and repeat on the same names. We want to be mindful of them as well and give other people a chance. But those are things we're doing today. But I'll be honest, it's a great question because we have not solved that yet.
One of the things that's come up in our course a couple of years ago, and one of the things we talked about was hidden assets. Typically, they're superstars in your company, but no one knows about them yet, right? The same people get all the work, but there may be others that are lying below the surface whose skills we don't really know that we haven't tapped into. And so in the book Strategic Doing, they talk about, leveraging your assets, including the hidden ones. And so we believe that those people who haven't been perhaps identified as the main problem solvers or participants, there's tons of them out there that we haven't even tapped into. And so part of the challenge that we try to teach is how do you uncover those hidden talents of people that really could contribute but haven't been asked to. And whether it's social listening or network analysis, I think they're out there. It's just a question of finding them. So that you're right, those individuals become bottlenecks because they can only do so much. Right. And they have the other jobs to do. And and so how do we engage more of the assets that we have to make them more productive? It's obviously a key question. Cool. I think any final questions? Steve,
one thing I would be, this is Susan, one thing I would be interested in is really understanding, you mentioned that you used a vendor to do some training. Do you actually have coaches embedded in HR that kind of consults and identifies, where there's opportunities to kind of apply Agile principles? Or do you use consultants, or you've been doing this so long now that, you kind of know it and that you're always looking from an operational efficiency perspective?
Maren, I'll start and then you can add. Susan, interestingly enough, we actually have a very large team of internal consultants inside of the product and technology organization that serve the enterprise. So they don't necessarily sit in HR, but if I have a challenge or if I'm trying to get some coaching for a team member, I can tap into that resource group and they'll help. We have a large, very large customer product organization, as you can imagine. So we centralize the skill in that unit, and then the HR team will tap into it as we need it. I'm actually tapping into that same team to get my technology folks some additional skill sets and learning so that, again, we can change their brains while we change everyone else's. We've actually brought those same Scrum Masters and Scrum Leads and training teams into different of the product teams to educate them as they're going through the process, to stand up the ceremonies, to do kind of the things that are no regret. And then we've seen HR actually, I'll call it, morph it a bit at moments. And that's when it becomes a real power, when it becomes that product team who makes it work for them. Instead of the daily 15 minutes, they'll go to twice a week or 3 times a week, 30-minute sprints, and then they're just delivering more. So what we're trying to do is provide them the frameworks provide them the education offerings and let them evolve it to what makes the most sense for their product and what they're working on. And Maren, you may have more to add.
Oh, I totally agree, Jay. I think Susan, early on, about 4 or 5 years ago, we did have consultancy to help kind of jumpstart, but I would say we weaned off of that with the support that Jay's mentioned. So as we kind of started to build the capability more in-house, more broadly, particularly in the tech organization, then leverage it. So it was not uncommon to have jumpstart of consultancy, but right, it's something you don't want to have forever. So we've kind of been weaning off of that.
Cool.
Great, thank you.
I think we're coming to, we could run this for another hour. I have so many other questions, but I wanted to thank Jay and Maren for a fantastic session. Just in terms of announcement, we have our next session will be on December 2nd. Eric Severson, who's the CHRO of Neiman Marcus, is going to be presenting. Eric's been interesting. He's developed Agile 3 different organizations in HR, at the Gap, at the Vita, now Neiman Marcus, and he's going to, hopefully, we're going to bring people from those previous companies together in a panel discussion. And we're going to talk about leadership of this effort. What does the CHRO and his team or her team need to do to make this really work? And so I encourage everybody to be there. If you have other ideas around Agile, thinking, or that you want to add that we can have a colloquium on, please let us know. Again, this was more of a gathering of minds, and we're recording it, and I'll be going over that. Tons of information to learn. If you have any other topics you want to use, fine. We have a course coming up. We're going to volunteer many of you to be speakers at that. We found that we want to create a very practical, engaging experience for our students, and it's been tremendous success so far. So, Steve, any closing comments from you, your observations?
Just my echoing your thanks to Maren and Jay. It's such a pleasure to work with you. You just great stuff that you shared with us today. Very grateful for that. And if we can help you and your organization in any way, Wayne and I also have the HR Consortium as a consulting body. If you'd like to have conversations with us about how we might be able to help you, we'll be happy to do that too.
Cool.